Are we recording?
You can see, I can't see that in there.
Can you see through there?
And then, not so much.
Okay, all right. We're going. I will call to order the Monday, March 28th, 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is, I'm sorry. I don't have a public comment card on any items not on the agenda, but this is the time to ask. Does anybody have a comment on any items not on the agenda? Okay, anybody online with a comment? All right. Okay. In that case, we're going to go to agenda item number 1, GLUA 22-0002 and LEG 22-00001. Housing Choices Code Update. It is a legislative hearing, and so I have a legislative script. A public hearing on a legislative application is scheduled for tonight. Our role is to conduct a public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Legislative actions involve the adoption or amendment of the city's land use regulations, comprehensive plan, maps, inventories, and other policy documents that affect the entire city or large portions of it. Legislative actions which affect land use shall begin with a public hearing before the Planning Commission. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. Upon a recommendation from the Planning Commission on a legislative action, the City Commission shall hold at least one public hearing on the proposal. Any interested person may provide written or oral testimony on the proposal at or prior to the hearing. At the conclusion of the hearing, the City Commission may adopt, modify, or reject the legislative proposal, or it may remand the matter to the Planning Commission for further consideration. If the decision is to adopt or at least some form of the proposal and thereby amend the city's land use regulations, comprehensive plan, official zoning maps, or some component of any of these documents, the City Commission decision shall be enacted as an ordinance. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are others in the audience who would like to participate. And by the way, I have some comment cards. If someone would like to participate that hasn't filled one out, please fill one out now. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed towards the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they're not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the initial hearing is closed. Now, before we begin, I need to say that members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. As a result, I'll call on each commissioner present to disclose any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. And I will start on my left with Commissioner Stoll.
No conflicts of interest, no.
All right. Commissioner West?
No conflicts of interest.
All right. Commissioner Mitchell?
I have no conflicts of interest.
And Commissioner LaSalle?
Nothing to declare.
And Commissioner Gage online?
No conflicts of interest.
All right, and as for myself, I have no conflicts of interest, and I think before we begin, there has been some recent questions about a commissioner's ability to be unbiased as if they are a developer in a land use or a legislative file. So I wanted our city attorney to give us a little bit of information on that if she could. Ms. Richter?
Thank you, Chair Schlagenhofer. I won't take much time, but I just wanted to remind the Planning Commission that legislative decisions are different than quasi-judicial decisions. In quasi-judicial decisions, the Planning Commission sits as a judge, and in those cases, each commissioner must be unbiased. In legislative file reviews, where the commission is, rather than sitting as a judge, is sitting as a policymaker, deciding the appropriate direction for the city from a policy perspective, the commissioners are supposed to be biased. I mean, they are supposed to have interest. They are supposed to meet with constituents and talk to them about what is the appropriate direction the city should go. The only limitation with respect to procedural issues for commissioners evaluating a proposal with respect to a legislative file is they can't have a conflict of interest. And a conflict of interest means a direct pecuniary interest for that commissioner or their family members resulting from the proposal. So it is expected that planning commissioners are made up of people who are interested in land or development, or they're business owners, or they are people who are qualified to evaluate zoning and appropriate land use policy. As a result of that, they probably may have a professional job that takes them into development or architecture or law or all those things, and they could potentially benefit from the opportunity to build additional housing units, for example, as this legislative proposal does offer. But that opportunity exists for everybody who owns land in Oregon City, if the ability to build fourplexes will result in greater land value. May not, may reduce your land value. We don't know. But what we do know is that the Oregon Ethics Commission has said that if you stand to benefit in a pool of people, of professionals, generally by a legislative proposal, you don't have a conflict of interest. Whereas if I file an application to seek a zone change and you happen to own the property next door, or you're a tenant of mine or something, you would stand directly to benefit or suffer as a result of a legislative file. So in that case, you would have a conflict of interest. Does that make sense? Any questions? Just wanted to clear that up for the benefit of the commission and the audience and folks in TV land.
Okay. No other questions for Ms. Richter? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think that helps a lot. Okay. Going back to my script, as for myself, I have no conflicts of interest. And with that said, I believe we're going to open. Hold on. Okay, we have to open a public record for opening the record for GLUA 22-0002 and LEG 22-00001 Housing Choices Code Update. And I believe our presentation is going to be by Ms. Christina Robertson-Gardner.
Thank you, Chair Schlagenhofer, Planning Commissioners. I'm going to start the presentation, and after staff's presentation, we will go to public comment. So I'll provide a general staff overview of the the codes, updates being proposed, and these policy questions that the Planning Commission is reviewing this evening. All right. So this evening is the first evidentiary hearing of this legislative file. Once again, staff will provide a staff overview. We'll open it up for public comment. If you choose to make public comment and have not turned in a form, you can grab a form on the side table and walk it over to Jacob anytime between now and when the public comment period ends this evening. After that, there'll be a Planning Commission discussion. You'll ask questions, provide to staff, provide direction on policy tracker questions. If anybody forgot their policy tracker, I have extra hard copies, so feel free to grab them. And then staff recommends that the Planning Commission continue the hearing till April 11th, which is the next Planning Commission hearing. There will be public comment this evening. Staff will incorporate that public comment into the public comment matrix at the next available Planning Commission agenda. So we have two public comments that came in between when the agenda was posted and this evening. You'll receive more public comment tonight. These emails were emailed to you today, but I just want to add them into the record as well. Mr. Nacita provided an additional email related to middle housing in commercial districts. And Mr. Egger provided public comment related to tiny homes and introduced the conflict of interest question that our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, responded to this evening. Just really briefly, middle housing and commercial district has been added to the future policy options. So both tiny homes and middle housing. One of my last slides this evening, I'm collecting the public comment policy questions that have come in over the last couple weeks, and those will be added to things the Planning Commission could choose to look at for our October policy hearings. There was a comment about internal conversion, and internal conversion as a house type was removed because 3 and 4plexes are now allowed by right in the low density and medium density dwelling districts. And in 2019, they were kind of considered as another option where you could add 3 or 4 units, especially in low density residential, if you didn't expand your home. Well, now with 3 and 4plexes being allowed by right, an internal conversion is redundant. And so it's not needed. And so therefore, that's why it was removed from the permitted uses. Additionally, tiny homes under 200 square feet were not identified as part of House Bill 2001, a requirement by the legislature, though it is an interesting topic about more affordable options, and staff recommends that the Planning Commission identify if that's something that they want to look at in the fall. I'm going to go on to my next slide. So I'm going to provide an overview of House Bill 2001, as well as the proposed code changes and the policy questions. So what is House Bill 2001? It is a middle housing law that was passed by the Oregon legislature in 2019 as a partial solution to address Oregon's housing shortage. They also at the same time, in the next year, adopted Senate Bill 458, which created an expedited land division option for middle housing that was created under House Bill 2001. So this House bill applies to all medium cities over 10,000 people and all large cities over 25,000, but all metro area cities over 1,000. And Oregon City is 37,000 residents, and therefore we are subject to House Bill 2001. Also happening this spring, our neighbors in Westland and Happy Valley and Lake Oswego and Gladstone are all reviewing the House Bill 2001 requirements and looking at their own zoning code. So cities throughout the metro region this spring or this winter looked through their code and amended their code or will amend their code to meet House Bill 2001. The key piece of the legislation, House Bill 2001, is these code changes need to be adopted by June 30th, actually need to be effective by June 30th, 2022. And the written inside the House bill, if cities do not comply with this requirement, the model code that was created by the OAR process through the Department of Land Conservation and Development will be the prevailing code for the city of Oregon City starting July 1st. So really, the option for this first section is Oregon City can pursue the code changes that both meet House Bill 2001 and work for our code. And if we are late, then any applicant on July 1st can pull out the model code, and that is what the staff person on the other side of the counter is legally obligated to review. And staff is really recommending if we can get through this first package and approve the first package by the June 30th effective date, then we can ensure that the codes meets the Oregon City's municipal code and is easy to implement rather than having to look at a third-party model code and try to review. Mm-hmm.
If this was passed in 2019, why are we just now getting to it?
Because it takes a long time to get through the the OAR process, to create the model code, to create the revised statutes, to get a grant, to hire a consultant, to go through the process. So Oregon City received a grant to help with this process, and that grant program, and that contract was just signed the 1st of October. So we're just kind of making our way through the process. But that's a good question. Okay, so what is middle housing? Well, we have a lot of this middle housing already permitted in Oregon City today. And really the key thing of House Bill 2001 is the legislature said cities need to zone middle housing in all of their residential districts, including our low density and medium density residential districts. So things like cluster homes or small homes built around a common yard, duplexes, 3 or 4plexes, and townhomes are all middle housing types. And the House bill has specifically said 2 main things. Large cities must allow duplexes on every lot and parcel that allow single-family detached dwellings, and allow triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters in areas that allow single-family detached dwellings. So that's kind of our big picture direction we received from the state legislature. So the direction this evening is really the first package. Our consultant, Elizabeth Decker, who presented last week, who's helped a lot of cities with their looking through the House bill requirements, looking through the Oregon administrative rules, and looking at each city's code to see what sections must be changed to be in compliance. Really look at kind of 2 directions she was given this fall, which is look what this Oregon City needs to do to comply with House Bill 2001 and the Senate Bill 458 by June 30th, and to the extent possible, maintain the policy direction established with the 2019 Equitable Housing Policy, which is the city's first entree into allowing some middle housing in our residential zones. This is a very narrow focus for this first round, and I'll talk about the second round later on in the presentation. Let's see. People have asked about private covenants, conditions, and restrictions on their own property, and I wanted to provide a slide to remind property owners and the Planning Commission that HB 2001 prohibits the creation of new covenants and restrictions, like if a new subdivision is built that prohibits middle housing. It does not affect existing CC&Rs. So to find out if you have a CC&R on your property, you can look at your deed. Oftentimes you have all that in a little CD-ROM that you got from the mortgage and the deed office when you signed it. Or you can talk to Clackamas County Records and they can look and do a deed search for you. Realtors are required to disclose any existing CC&Rs before properties are sold. And important for the Planning Commission in the city is the City of Oregon City does not enforce CC&Rs or other such private agreements. So it could be that a property is allowed to redevelop with a duplex or a 4plex, but they may be privately constrained and not allowed to do that. So that is a private restriction that overlays on top of any code updates that happen today. Mm-hmm.
When does the effective date of the prohibition for new CC&Rs? Is that June 30th of this year as well, or is
I
it
believe
previously?
so, yeah.
So NHOA could do it right now.
True, but actually we have existing conditions we created as part of the Equitable Housing Project.
Oh, I see.
That prohibits, I don't know the exact wording, but it'll be definitely HB 2001 compliant by this June 30th. But we're about halfway to already there with our Equitable Housing.
Thank you.
Okay, I need to add another silly question to that.
Sure.
What if every neighborhood right now decided to type up some CCNRs saying we're not allowing duplexes and fourplexes? Is that ship sailed?
Well, as part of our 2019 code update, we've already greatly restricted the ability for CCNRs.
Okay, all right.
As part of a subdivision. But that does not affect existing ones that were created legally and recorded. So I have two slides that provide an overview of changes. These are further defined in the staff report. And as part of the deliberations discussion, I'm open for specific questions. But just to provide a general overview of how those two broad statements of allowing duplexes everywhere that a single family is allowed and allowing middle housing in residential zones, how that kind of flows through our zoning code is we've updated definitions to terms such as duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhome, and cottage cluster to be consistent with HB 2001. We've added duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in the low density district. We did not have that previously. There is no change to, there's no change to uses in the medium density or high density districts. Those already allowed all the middle housing that we are reviewing today. Really is the main change of uses is adding those all the middle housing in the low density district. Dimensional standards were updated but to the minimum lot sizes as directed by HB 2001, such as minimum setbacks, building, and lot coverage. Design standards for middle housing must be clear and objective and to be at the same level as single family residential. So some of the middle housing design standards needed to be changed because they could not be requiring something more than what single family house required. So for example, middle housing previously required a specific amount of open space, but we do not require that for single family residential. So we had to remove that as part of the middle housing requirement. If in the future, the Planning Commission wants to put requirements on new single-family residential, they could also add that to middle housing. But if it's not currently regulated by single-family, we could not regulate it in middle housing. Density standards. So this is a bit of an interesting one. So I'm going to say this clearly. Middle housing is exempt from the maximum design density standards, and this is required by HB 2001. So anything above a single family residential, in a sense, is kind of like a bonus. It's not calculated as part of your maximum density. It could be calculated as part of your minimum density if you wanted it to. So let's say as part of a subdivision, you had to have 4 units to meet some density requirements. You could choose to say, well, I'm going to do a 4-plex here, so I'll meet the minimum density requirements, and that would be calculated in. But anything above the minimum density standards, middle housing is not counted in the maximum. So if, and this is straight out of the House bill. And so the other piece that was added was, as you recall in your policy question, there was a range of densities for townhomes, kind of a low, medium, and high maximum density, and the planning commissioners can choose one of those kind of low, medium, high as part of your policy directions. The 17.6 units per acre is the low option. And there's once again, no change to the minimum densities. The next slide. Other things that have been revised to meet House Bill 2001, all middle housing must be reviewed as a type 1 process. So type 1 processes are over the counter or within, a week or 2 review. That is not noticed as a land use process and uses very clear and objective non-discretionary criteria. It is done with the building permit. The one item that was not part of the type 1 process was cluster homes. That was today as part of a type 2 process through the site plan and design review, and that has been revised to implement it as a type 1 process with the building permit. Land divisions, a new type.
I'm sorry,
Sure.
Can you repeat that again?
Sure. Today,
Cluster homes today.
cluster homes today are a type 2 notice process.
Okay.
Cluster homes with this code update will be a type 1 non-discretionary process that will be reviewed with the building permit.
And that's per,
Per House Bill 2001,
Okay,
we
thank you.
cannot have cluster homes be a type 2 process.
okay, thank you.
Christina, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just briefly differentiating what type 1 and type 2 mean?
So a type 1 process is has the least amount of discretion, is very clear and objective. I call it the worksheet. If you can fill out a worksheet, you've probably met whatever the criteria is. It's do the math, show that you've met the standard. The type 2 process is clear and objective, but there may be a little discretion, especially relates to maybe street improvements or how to take the city's development code and place it on a site. It's not the level of discretion. That'd be type 2. It's notice to the neighbors, and there's an ability to comment and appeal to the city commission. Type 3 processes where we are in front of the planning commission, those would include like a conditional use or a code interpretation. That involves more discretion, where you can look at city policies and weigh and balance competing policies and provide direction. And a type 4 is the highest process, which goes to the planning commission, then the city commission, and that has the most amount of discretion. Those are legislative files such as this, zone changes, comprehensive plan map amendments, or comprehensive plan amendments, and those include the most discretion. So in this situation, cluster homes have been moved from a type 2 noticed process, it's still a staff approval, to a type 1, which is not a notice process, which is done with the building permit.
A quick question on that.
Sure.
Would it be possible for it to end up being a type 2 or type 3 if an applicant applied for a variance and setbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So because it's so non-discretionary, if an applicant wanted to do something and it just didn't work, and they may need to apply for maybe a setback variance because it would work just for one more foot, then they would be in front of the planning commission as a type 3 process.
So that's not prohibited then for
No,
them
you
to...
can get just like you can get a variance for your house addition. You really want a house addition and you need a 2-foot variance. And the planning commission a couple times a year may see those setback variances, and they're looked at very specifically for the proposed situation, and look at the impacts and the variance criteria.
Thank you.
Your slide says that the type 1 land use review is concurrent with a building permit. Mm-hmm. Is the expedited land division also concurrent with a building permit?
Yes and no. So I have a slide on that. Let me talk a little bit about the process when we get to those. That's a great question, because we're still working through that as well.
Okay, and I assume we're going to talk about parking in more depth later?
Yes,
because
yeah.
I think that's a hot button.
I think it's a hot button too. So land division, this is a new category. It's not a subdivision, it's not a partition. It is allowing a proposed or existing middle housing project to be divided, to be sold with the land underneath it. And I have a future slide which I'll kind of go through that. So it's kind of this new option of land development and sale. Parking, House Bill 2001 provides some very specific parking direction, which is 1 off-street parking space per dwelling unit. And we have amended the code to affect that, though we were very close to meeting that already. There is a policy question this evening about, in some situations, allowing on-street parking to be counted as a credit, and that's something above and beyond the minimum requirement set out by House Bill 2001. Driveways and access, we are generally in compliance with the driveway and access. You'll see a small change from 12 feet to 10 feet at a minimum option, but for the most part, we are compliant with House Bill 2001. And this is often asked by folks as it relates to gold protected areas. These are what we call overlay zones. These are on top of whatever your underlying zone is. So if maybe you're R5 medium density residential, but you might have a stream on your property and you may be on a steep slope. So those are 2 overlay zones that also affect how you can develop. Historic overlay, the Historic Review Board is working on amending the design guidelines for new construction to provide additional direction for middle housing in both Kenema and McLaughlin and on landmarks. It is not needed by June 30th. They still have the regulatory ability, and middle housing has been allowed in Kenema for a couple of years, but Staff has really recommended, it's always good to give clear direction to all parties, both the public and staff and the applicant. So the historic reviewer is going to be working through that this year to amend their design guidelines for new construction, specifically to address middle housing. The flood overlay district is still involved. Right now, we don't actually have any residential zones in our flood overlay district. Those are generally in our mixed use downtown and Willamette Falls downtown district. So HB 2001 really is not intersecting with our flood overlay district, but it would still apply, whatever the flood overlay requires. Geologic hazard overlay district, that'll be one of your policy questions this evening. Currently, we have areas that are in steep slopes or historic landslides or their buffer have a reduced density of 2 units per acre. So if you are a property with that, you would not really be able to take advantage of the middle housing that may be allowed in your zone if the Planning Commission chooses to stay with the existing code. The Willamette Greenway overlay, same thing, looks at compatibility along the Greenway, and Natural Resource Overlay District looks at impact to the stream corridors and protection, so that does not change any development inside the stream corridor, regardless if you're residential or commercial, will be reviewed for the Natural Resource Overlay District. Okay, my next slide. So utilities have been a question that has come up, and I wanted to create a slide to kind of better explain how we are looking at utilities in regards to middle housing. You'll see the section on the left, which is infill, which I call one existing lot. There's an existing lot that's either vacant or maybe an existing house that may be demolished, but it's a vacant lot, or maybe with a house still on it. And then there's the land use process. So that's partitions and subdivisions where you're creating brand new full development right lots. And how we look at utilities for middle housing depends on which group you're in. If you are an infill lot, middle housing and single family housing are looked at the same way as it relates to utilities. So all new units must hook up to city facilities, so sewer and water, and address their stormwater. No individual transportation analysis is required, so you don't have to do a transportation statement if you're a new single-family infill house. You would not do that for a new infill middle housing if you have an existing lot. And right now, 10% of the valuation of a project could be used to upgrade your abutting streets. So if you were a new single-family house today in Oregon City, we can look at the valuation of your project, and up to 10% of that could be dedicated to street upgrades like sewer, or usually it is curb, gutter, sidewalk, trees. That will not change for middle housing, same thing, 10% of the valuation of the project could be used for street upgrades.
Would that mean that there would be no SDCs?
Nope, the SDCs are above and beyond. So if I'm a single family house today, I pay system development fees because that is looking at my impact to the future of the whole network, be it the transportation network or the water network or sewer network. And we have future capital improvement projects like a new water tower or a new pipe upgrades that we have in our master plan. So you pay those system development fees that go in to our future capital improvement projects. What you also do is we can require you to upgrade your abutting frontage if it is not fully upgraded. So if you have an underdeveloped frontage, maybe you just have a grassy knoll as your frontage, we could potentially require you to build sidewalks or curb if up to 10% of the valuation of your project today.
So if I have a lot and I build a duplex on it, I would not be assessed any SDCs?
No, you would, same thing. So the same the idea is middle housing infill is assessed for utility upgrades the same way single family is. You pay your system development fees, and we could request up to 10% of the valuation of your project be used for abutting street improvements. What we can't have you do is we can't trigger you for upgrading an intersection a block and a half away because you're one new dwelling unit. You wouldn't proportionally be impacting that.
So on some of these middle housing, an expedited land review, there may be some of the lots that are not on the street, correct?
Well, all of the parent lots will have street frontage.
The parent lot's on the street.
And
But if
that
I'm-
is what we're going to be looking at for street upgrades.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Even if the child lots are not on the
Yeah.
street?
We're
look at the
looking at
parent
so we're looking at street upgrades before any middle housing land division's done. First come in, you get your building permit, you do your middle housing development package, we look at potential street upgrades. So we treat you the same as we would a single family house.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
How is the valuation of a project determined? What's the mechanism? for
sure,
that?
it's a collaboration between building, planning, and the applicant, and when there's disagreement, we usually work with building on their valuation formulas.
Is it like a per square foot? Is it
Yeah.
market rate? Is it?
It's for hard and soft costs, and there's a valuation formula that the building division uses when they do valuation for projects.
Thank you.
Christina, and all this applies whether the project is a rental project or an ownership.
Yeah, we don't
It's
get
the
involved.
same?
Yeah, so that term is called tenureship, and we do not get involved as a city of the tenure of a property, if it's owner, occupied, or rental. It's not something a city regulates. So I want to talk a little bit about the second column. This is when you create new full development right lots. So if I'm doing a subdivision, say I'm proposing a 25 lot subdivision today. For single family or middle housing, all my lots must hook up to not only my lots hook up to city required facilities, but I must build those city facilities in front of anything that's fronting the property. So this often involves new streets or expanding streets or extending city water, sewer, stormwater through the process. So the land use process will require utility and street upgrades proportional to the proposal. We also look at a reasonable worst case transportation analysis. So in this situation, we could look at how many potential middle housing units could be in a subdivision. One thing that was recommended in the transportation analysis done with us through DKS Associates, which is attached to your packet, is they recommended, while it's not legally required, it would be helpful, kind of like the Historic Review Board, to provide clear direction to applicants and the city and neighbors how to scope when a subdivision could potentially have middle housing in it. So one of the recommended future projects this next year is to have a revision of the transportation impact analysis to provide clear direction exactly how to scope that. Though today we still have the ability, July 1st, to require reasonable worst case analysis of a proposal to ensure if middle housing is built on it. So that's kind of how I really see it in regards to utilities. It's really, middle housing is treated the same way in process and requirements as the same as single family. If you're an infill, you're doing the same requirement as single family. If you're a subdivision, you're doing the same requirement, and we could potentially look for transportation of those additional proposed units if that's part of your proposal, your impact for transportation. Anybody have any
Christina,
questions?
I've got a question. I don't want to overcomplicate tonight's meeting with public utility questions, but if you've got a neighborhood, and let's say for some reason four houses on the block turn into fourplexes. I don't know how that happens, but let's say it happens. And you get to the point where the pipe in the street just can't take another one. Who has to pay for that once you reach the limit? Because the first three were most of the problem, and now the last guy needs to pay for a 6-inch pipe to become an 8-inch pipe, or?
Sure, there's a lot of great what-if questions, and kind of what I've heard when talking to our engineering staff and our engineering consultants is, for the most part, infill housing is going to be spread throughout the city, so guessing any one street is going to be very hard. All we can do is monitor. So we can monitor, but I can tell you that any individual, this is me as a planner, not an engineer, so I'm keeping my planning hat on, but any individual line is generally not sized so small that they can't take advantage of a couple additional units on any block. So we'll just have to take a look if there's any unique case as it comes in. But for the most part, what we've seen is for infill to the left, it has been spread throughout the city and is really, we can't anticipate anything more than that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm going to do the next slide. Okay, now we're on to middle housing land division. And I took this from the FAQ page that is on your agenda packet. And I kind of like this, City of Eugene put this together, and I liked it so much that I'm using it. So thank you, City of Eugene. So middle housing, I like to think is this new third option. It's not a full right land division like you'd have in a subdivision lot or partition lot where you have full ability to build anything. So when I build a new lot in a subdivision, I could build potentially anything that's allowed as a permitted use, unless it's been further constrained by a condition. When you do the middle housing land division, you are just carving up units in an existing or about to be constructed middle housing project that complies with HB 2001. It's a unique land division that is tied to the actual middle housing proposal. The middle housing proposal goes away, then you kind of revert back to the original parent lot and the full development right that has. So if I buy lot 3 of this middle housing project, I might buy the land underneath it and lot 3, but I am part of an approved middle housing project and I don't have the ability to add another unit onto it, right? I'm a unit in an approved middle housing project. So I kind of think of this as a legal instrument to allow people in a middle housing project to own the land underneath their unit. Just kind of how condominiums are a legal instrument, this is a new legal instrument. And it is a land division, but it has this whole, where we've created a whole new chapter that funnels people in through the middle housing land division. So setbacks, lot coverage are based on the parent parcel of the middle housing. So you'll always be looking at, does the middle housing project comply with the underlying zones dimensional standards, the lot size, the parent lot size, the parent setbacks, the parent lot coverage. Anything, we call a child unit, so that would be like units 1, 2, and 3 are still part of this parent process. So any additions that happen or changes that happen need to be in compliance with middle housing. So it is an expedited land division, which is actually something that already exists in ORS. And we have, people could actually pursue it in Oregon City today for subdivisions, but it would have to be proposals that were not with overlay districts on them. And in Oregon City, we seem to have a lot of subdivisions with overlay districts. Something has a stream or a hillside or historic or something. So it's not something that's been pursued a lot, but the expedited land decision was where the legislature directed implementation. And that basically is a type 2 process that's noticed. It has a reduced 120-day date. And the appeal is done not by the city commission, but it is done by a third party city appointed hearings referee. So that's what will happen with middle housing land division. So same thing, the legislature appointed cities to implement middle housing through the expedited land use process.
So regarding the underlying lot coverage, so using this slide, let's say that this lot has a maximum of 40% lot coverage.
Sure.
As built, it's 35%. Mm-hmm. Unit 2 adds on and uses up that other 5. Are the other 2 folks out of luck as far as adding square footage?
Depends on how you write any restricted covenants or easements or agreements, legal agreements. So it would be up to a property owner to decide, how they wanted to agree on that. In the absence of that, the first one in we would review it. But I can foresee people asking that question and wanting to have in writing when they buy the lot, direction privately between the 3, in this situation, the 3 owners, what comes next.
2 questions. Mm-hmm. So I understand that the perimeter setbacks of the parent lot mm-hmm. stay in place. What about internal setbacks, like between
Yeah,
Lot
the
2 and
legislature
Lot 3.
specifically said this is where it's a new concept, which is you're just drawing lawns on a map to separate ownership.
So there would not have to be any of the internal setback.
Correct.
Okay, so if I wanted to do a detached duplex, it could be 6 inches away from the other building?
I would have them talk to our building division, but potentially, yeah.
Okay, and I know
But you
there's,
still have to meet the underlying zone setbacks of your neighbor. You know,
well, yeah, on the other, like if we're looking at, let's look at lot 2.
yes,
At the bottom of the slide and the right side of the slide, I'd have to comply with the setback. But between house number 1 and house number 2, I don't have to.
correct.
Okay, thank you. The other question, if I own the parent lot and I do an expedited land review, can I sell the raw land of the other lots?
So I have a pause because the legislature did give direction that the expedited land division has to be part of a middle housing proposal. And we are working through the level of detail we need to have. Does it have to be a full building permit? Does it have to be a building permit submittal to be able to plat the land? And just so you know, the legislature very specifically said middle housing can't be speculative. It has to be part of a middle housing proposal. But it can be speculative in the sense that you turn in your building permit for the proposal, get it platted, and don't finish it until you sell the land. That makes sense.
What you're saying makes sense.
You can't sell the land until it's platted, right? In every circumstance, you can't sell land until it's platted, right? To make the land divisions that you can transfer. So your
Question is, you do not necessarily need a certificate of occupancy to plat for this project as directed by,
you don't have to build anything.
Okay, you don't have to build anything.
you don't have to get the certificate of occupancy, but you have to submit an approved middle housing project.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we asked a lot of these questions too this year.
And I know you said that you can't subdivide a subdivided lot.
Correct.
Can I undivide it?
Yeah, you can consolidate it and remove any legal deeds that are on it.
Okay.
Okay, so what is in this package? There really is two parts to this. The must address part, which are in your proposed red lines as part of the agenda exhibit. And these are items where HB 2001 provides clear direction, or there are only one or two options to choose from to implement. And this has this June 30th effective date. Legislative package, this legislative file, LEG 2000-001, we recommend to be continued to a fall hearing and look at package 2 for two things. Look at any technical revisions that may be needed. There may be some staff may be through the technical implementation may bring up, maybe there's additional sentence for clarification we may need. So some of it this fall is needed just to make sure that there's no implementing snags that come through this process. And 2, any policy questions that the Planning Commission or City Commission want to review that go beyond or are not required, but still related to middle housing can be done in a February hearing. And the reason why we're separating these two out actually is really, I agree with Mr. Nocita who talked about holistic review. What we don't want, or I don't want as staff, is to adopt the HB 2001 code and then kind of on the fly have to address public comments that come in, and it's not done holistically. And we have a timeline that's happening, and we aren't getting a chance to think about the overall effect of how do we want to address middle housing in Oregon City that may be above and beyond what House Bill 2001, or there are things that we're worried about that we want to track and maybe we can regulate that is not required, but something we may want to pursue as part of middle housing. So staff is recommending as part of the adoption process of package 1 that the City Commission send this legislative file back to the Planning Commission for hearings in October of 2022, so we can look holistically at some of these additional policy questions.
I got a quick question. So the public comments and comments we've received up to now and then after, those will be also part of the record for the fall?
Yep, this whole thing is part of the record, and if you made comment, most importantly, if you made comment now, you'll part of the record to the very end of the legislative process, and you'll get public notice and be part of the record all the way to the end of this process.
Okay, so even though we're working on, most likely we're going to be working on the compliance version of this package, all the comments and input we'll be able to keep using, moving beyond that.
This is all one legislative package. We just have one adoption ordinance. We'll have a second adoption ordinance, all within one package.
That sounds great. Thank you.
So what are the inputs of the code package? You saw this slide at your Planning Commission work session. And the inputs are HB 2001 and the Senate Bill 458, the Oregon Administrative Rules, which are attached under the additional links in your agenda, which provides pretty clear direction about specific items such as minimum lot size, minimum density, parking, things where we don't have a lot of discretion. They've created a model code. So they've created a demonstration of how a city could meet the HB 2001 and the OARs. In some situations where there was a range of options, they picked one. So often it was the middle range. That's just kind of what they did. But they provided a code that meets HB 2001. And there's a link to that as well in our packet. And then we had a code audit done by Elizabeth Decker, our consultant, who went through our code and identified where we were compliant with HB 2001 and where we needed to make additional changes. That's available on your packet. In addition, we had policy questions. We've been asking staff comments. We've had 2 surveys, one in October and one in January. We asked some of these policy questions to the community. As you know, surveys are not statistically significant in these kind of planning surveys, but they do provide a pulse of the community. So they are good resources, and they have a lot of great comments in the back that provide some good nuggets about what our community is interested in, as well as some focus group interviews. We had both for-profit and nonprofit developers who develop middle housing, and those available in your packet. And out of that comes the red lines before you, and then this fall package, which we may look at additional questions. So there is a bunch of policy questions we'll be going through this evening. I have the slides up. I'm going to briefly talk about them, and then we can come back. But your options this evening for the policy question is 1, choose the compliance option, which exists in the code today, the proposed red lines, and do not revisit in the fall of 2022. 2 would be choose the compliance option, but say, I think we should still revisit it in the fall of 22. I'm not quite ready right now, but I think we should revisit it in the fall of 2022 and see if that's something we want to pursue. Or 3 would be choose to include the alternative policy option that kind of oftentimes goes beyond the minimum requirement and not revisit in the fall of 2022. I do recommend if you do make code changes above the compliance option, you don't revisit it back again. Because if we're going to extend more opportunities, we don't want to pull it back in the fall. So this would be something, if you chose to use the alternative policy option, I do not recommend we revisit it in the fall.
Christina? So there were a lot of policy options in there. Is it possible that we are clear on some and, oh, you took the slide down, and we choose the compliance, and then there's some that we might want to revisit in fall? We don't have to do all one, all the other, right?
No. Yeah, I can see any individual planning commissioner may say 3 or 4, I don't want to revisit in the fall, keep compliance option.
Okay.
4 or 5, yes, I think there's more merit to further discussion, but we're not ready now. Those are all valid answers. So we have in your agenda packet this matrix we put together as a tracking form. You do not need to give these to me. These are just for your own policy tracking. And I'll go back to these, but just remind everybody, as you go through, you can make comments. You don't have to bring them back to staff. So I'm going to go through the policy questions briefly, and then as we go back to deliberation after public comment, we can go to specific slides. So the first one is middle housing and geohazard areas. As I said previously, in our city code today, we have a 2 units per acre reduction if you were in a geologic hazard area that is subject to historic landslides or steep slopes or the buffer. The compliance option today is to keep the code as is, and that would effectively remove middle housing options in the geologic hazard area. If you wanted an alternative option would be, you'd still be required, as same as single family, to have the reduced footprint and reduced disturbance area, but how many units you put in your cube, if you want to think it that way, could be allowed as a new option to have additional units kind of in the same volume that a single family house could be built. The next is townhouse maximum. As identified, the Oregon administrative rules identified kind of a low, medium, and high maximum density for townhomes. Staff put in the lowest density as the default compliance option in your code. If you'd like to have a look at any additional density, that could be pursued, but you'd have to provide staff that direction. So the compliance option is already in your red line code, and that is the lowest density, which I think is a 17.5 units per acre. Duplex, triplex, and quadplex configurations. This looks at allowing attached or detached units. So the compliance option is to continue to require all units to be attached. An alternative option would be to permit duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes to be detached units. An initial step could be consider permitted detached duplexes. I did provide some additional direction to the Planning Commission this morning that I wanted to provide to folks in the audience and on Zoom. The current Oregon City Code does identify a common wall as a definition of attached. And the model code and the Oregon administrative rules looks at a more expansive definition of attached. It just says it is attached. It doesn't specify that it's common wall. So in your code package, the red lines are in compliance or more in line with the model code, which strikes out the common wall requirement and just says it must be attached. In Oregon City, attachment can be a breezeway. So if in the current code red lines you see today are more in line with the model code, which allows either a common wall or a breezeway, both could be considered an attached unit. So duplex lot coverage in medium density zones. The compliance option is to maintain the maximum building lot coverage for duplexes equal to that of single family in each zone, which depending on the zone is either 50 or 55%. An alternative would be to increase the maximum building lot coverage to match the current allowance for single family dwellings plus an ADU. So that's something to think about. One option would be to pursue that alternative option this spring, or to keep the compliance option and further discuss it in the fall. The lot coverage in low density zones, kind of the same flavor, which is set the maximum building lot coverage to middle housing types to be the same as single family detached, or potentially increase the maximum building lot coverage to a higher number, specifically related to triplex or quadplex and scale up. So once again, the compliance option in your package today is middle housing has the same lot coverage as single family. An alternate approach would be to pursue additional increases in lot coverage.
Christina, I need to go back to the duplexes.
Sure. Right here.
Detached duplexes. I looked up the definition of duplex, and it states that they're attached walls. I could not
Right, so
find anything that...
That's our current definition, says common wall, which means you have a shared wall together.
Yeah.
And so the state model code has a more expansive definition that just says it's attached, which could be a breezeway.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so cottage cluster on-street parking credits. So for many people I know who are interested in parking issues, House Bill 2001 provides specific direction to have a requirement of only requiring one off-street parking space per cottage unit with no reduction for available on-street parking spaces. So if you had a street and you had a budding on-street parking, today you can't count that as part of your minimum requirement. That's the compliance option. An alternative option would be to allow people to utilize in their calculation, it's not for the specific uses, just in the calculation of your on-street parking, your parking requirements would be to allow on-street parking that abuts your project to be considered in that calculation. That would be an alternative option. The last one is garage options for cottage clusters. So currently in our code today, we have existing option for a 600 square foot detached parking garage and an option for small attached garages that count towards the total gross floor area of a cottage cluster home. If you wanted to, you could pursue additional code changes that allowed more attached garages, either standalone or outside of the required, in addition to the required square footage of the unit. So today we are allowed a 600 square foot detached parking garage building, or you could build an attached garage, but you have to count it as part of your calculation of your house. So once again, after public comment, we'll be looking at Exhibit M in your packet, which is your policy tracking form, and really looking at those 3 questions. Choose the compliance option, do not revisit in the fall. Choose the compliance option this spring, but revisit in the fall to have further discussions. Doesn't necessarily mean you support it or not, you just think further discussions are warranted. And choose to include an alternative policy option this round of the code update. Staff does not recommend you revisit in the fall if you do that. So there are additional policy questions that came out that are not required as part of this HB 2001, but Elizabeth Decker brought them up that kind of are floating around, and they aren't necessarily required by HB 2001, but this project touches on them and it might have merit to have that conversation. These include multiple accessory dwelling units per lot, high density zone development standards. They're now pretty darn close to our medium density development standards. There's not as much separation between the 2 zones. Lot averaging for subdivisions, is the underlying thought process for lot averaging the same now that middle housing is allowed? Should there be affordability incentives? A land use approach, not financial. So maybe if there's an actual capital A affordable housing project that meets the affordability criteria, do they have additional incentives like additional density or reduced setbacks that could be pursued? Are there other, as directed by the Planning Commission? Through public comment so far, I've identified a couple that the Planning Commission could choose to direct staff to include in the fall packet, allowing conversion of non-conforming single-family homes to duplex in commercial zones or zones that don't allow duplexes. Allow middle housing in commercial districts, especially designated regional framework corridors. So right now, duplexes are not an allowed use in the mixed-use corridor zone, though HB 2001 is not directed towards commercial districts, just residential, so it's not subject to HB 2001, but is a good question to have, and it might be relevant conversation this fall. There's also a conversation about tiny homes. These are homes under 200 square feet. Is there a place in Oregon City for them? When, where, how? That is not related to HB 2001, but is kind of middle housing adjacent, so could be directed by the Planning Commission to have these discussions in the fall. So the next steps, staff recommends that the Planning Commission continue the hearing to April 11th for the final recommendations of City Commission. This will allow staff to collect city comments this evening and provide any answers to questions or compile a direction that we've received this evening. City Commission meetings will happen in April and May, and that, once again, that first package needs to be effective by June 30th. If not effective by June 30th, the model code applies. And we're looking at a second package starting in the fall of 2020. We'll probably pick an October Planning Commission hearing date at the time that the first package is approved with a date certain.
Christina? Are containers, the shipping containers, are those less than 200 square feet in a tiny home? Because don't we have some of those already, but maybe they're bigger than 200 square feet?
Yeah,
I
it
don't know.
depends. So the shipping containers is a material, it's the size differentiation. So I think the shipping containers you're seeing are larger than 200 square feet.
Okay.
Early on, when you talked about internal conversions by right, I believe you mentioned triplexes and quadplexes. What about duplexes?
Well, duplexes are now allowed so I'm talking about single family and, low density and medium density residential zones. All these uses are now allowed by right. So the internal conversions were written for the low and medium density districts. And so the question is, we struck that out because you didn't need to have internal conversions since you're now allowed to have those by right.
In which zones?
In the low density and medium density zones.
Okay, including duplexes.
Including duplexes, correct.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
Mr.
I don't think you
Nacita-
mentioned them
Right, what
before.
Mr. Nacita is bringing up is duplexes in our commercial districts, which duplexes are not allowed currently in mixed-use corridor one or two.
I'm talking about in residential. Right now, I'm talking about in residential. Okay, I didn't hear you mention duplexes. I just wanted to be clear.
So you have duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes are all now allowed by right, and so you don't need to do an internal conversion process. If you wanted to convert your home to a duplex, you would just work with the building division and by right be able to do that. You wouldn't, the past was to allow more homes within an existing footprint. So 3 and 4plexes were only allowed through this little path, which now is a by right allowance.
Okay, thank you.
So it was a big presentation. Thank you, everybody, for listening. But there's a lot of information to go through, and now we're, staff is ready for handing it over for public comments.
All right, Christina, thank you very much. That was a lot to go through. Does anyone have any last questions for Christina before we go to public testimony?
Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to make a clarification.
Sure.
That what this proposal does is create opportunities in our existing zones. There is no development that we are reviewing or that is being proposed at this time. It's simply to create an opportunity that should a property owner choose to go this route, they could.
Right, it's just to get our city code compliant with House Bill 2001.
Yeah, correct. Thank you.
That's a great comment, and I was remiss, I was going to say that, yeah. There's a different, no actual development comes out of this. It would have to be owner initiated to actually develop.
Right. So if the owners of the properties in Oregon City didn't want to do any duplexes or threeplexes or fourplexes, none would occur.
Correct.
Okay. The state's not mandating a certain number of anything. Okay. All right, thank you. I think that's a good thing to point out. Okay, public testimony. First of all, I just want to say thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you being part of the process, and I know you have better things to do. I'm going to go through these in order. I do need to ask, is there any member, any representative of a recognized neighborhood association, government agency, or other incorporated public interest organization here? Would you like to speak?
I'm not sure of the
Okay, so you'd be speaking personally, not representing the neighborhood association?
Right, I will bring up experience I have as chair, but not representing my neighborhood association.
Okay,
Yep.
so how do we handle that?
Yes, this person will testify as an individual.
As a citizen.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, we will start with Mr. Paul Edgar, and Paul, you have 3 minutes, as everyone else does. We have a counter right there. If you could keep an eye on it, do your best. And please start with, state your name and city of residence.
Thank you. I'm Paul Edgar, live in Oregon City. I would also mention that I raised my hand. I am a member of the Oregon City Historic Review Board. And I'm also a member of the Clackamas County Community Action Board, primarily focused at homeless and social services. Thank you. Three things. I hope you read my email that I sent in, number one. Number two, safety should never be compromised on anything. Transportation, any place, safety should never be compromised. Number three, a neighborhood like Kanema, where it's a National Register Historic District, there are expected guidelines for historic properties like this. I don't believe that we should be compromising those guidelines, our codes, and I believe that they're important. But the most important thing that I wanted to bring up is that I am all in on affordable middle housing. It's all about saving lives. When people can't afford to have a roof over their head, they can't be part of the American dream. It changes everything. And right now, I think that there should be some pricing. And if it goes back, if you read into this, where there's a qualification on if we're going to reduce SDC fees or some of the permit fees, there has to be hard understandings about justifying it to bring housing in at a price. Because the key thing is that they can't afford to get a loan, or they can't afford the rent, or whatever it is. This puts people onto the street, sleeping in their cars. And if somebody's in there, goes houseless for between 10 to 12 months historically, they fall into chronic homelessness. And then they become a cost onto society that's significantly greater. And so when we're looking at how to create middle housing, part of the problem is physically getting the price down. I'm going to submit, I sent my letter that I gave to you to Todd Islet, our local architect, that I communicate a great deal with on historic houses, and asked Todd to weigh in on what we could do to try to bring housing prices down. And of course, he could read my about having tiny houses. I believe that one thing we've got to do is we've got to get the overall cost down. So if we can't get the cost to create dwelling units at a price that comes out as middle housing, we're just kidding ourselves. And it's not winning. And so if it means bringing something down into minimal living, where there's something 200-400 square feet, but it's designed to be built in a manner that brings the cost down. If we can divide some lots so that the lot is, if I have a 5,000 square foot lot, I might change it into a 3,000 or 2,500 square foot lot. But we've got to be able to try to come up with ideas. And I hope, I would also like to ask for a continuance to the next meeting so we can all get a chance to think things through. Come back, keep it open, keep this discussion open. It's important that Todd came back to me, and I just would kind of come back and I will submit what Todd's comments are for the record. And he said I could do this. But we need to look at duplexes where they fit, triplexes where they fit. I would not propose a triplex in a historic district is incompatible. But I would look at commercial areas when I've looked at trying to create shelter housing for homeless people. Some of the most important areas where we could do some of this is next to, could be commercial, could be multi-use. Those options need to be put into allowing for development, maybe where we never thought about allowing development in the past. But if that fits and it can give us the type of affordable housing and transportation where I've got water, sewer, access to transit, transportation, those things have to play in. And if it's in a commercial area, maybe it's down by the cove or someplace along a thoroughfare, it should be considered, even if it's along Beaver Creek Road in some areas.
Paul, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I wish we had more time for everybody.
Okay.
But we appreciate your comments. Mr. Jerry Herman. And please state your name and city of residence for the record. Is your chair stuck?
My name's Jerry Herman. I'm a resident of Gladstone, but the 100 and plus some youth I brought in the city over the last 4 or 5 years have made a big difference on lots of community projects. I'm here in the spirit of Tom McCall. The reason we're here is Tom McCall put this process in place for us back in the early 1970s. He's my favorite guy, and he's the best darn governor you'll ever recall, and his name was Tom McCall. The reason I want to share that name with you a bit was his whole thing was land use planning should be guided by the citizens for the good of our state, and he invoked many different people. Senate Bill 100 was a work of Hector McPherson, a farmer that cared about farmland and forest land, wanted to see those things stewarded, but they also knew development was coming, which of course is the reason we're here tonight. Anyone ever heard of Lawrence Holoprin, greatest architect on the west coast of America? Or Frederick Law Olmsted, the founder of landscape architecture? These people, McCall, cared about and researched and brought them into his process. Now, what does this have to do with what we're talking about tonight? Okay, you're undergoing, of course, the considerations of the densification of this city and so forth. In the 1990s, I have to remind you, Metro adopted their functional plans for growth management. That included an urban growth boundary. We all know about that. We just sometimes wonder, can we really work with that process? The demands of that time were supposed to make sure that development could occur in the urban areas that we're at within the Portland area, and we're here in Oregon City, that we'd have a way to accommodate that kind of growth in an organized manner. In that plan of the 1990s, Metro required transit corridors be considered to guide development. And in the early 2004, when Oregon City adopted their comprehensive plan, and I was a part of that process, by the way. I was one of the founding members of the Natural Resource Committee, and we looked at all the natural resource area issues. We developed much of the language of the Natural Resource Overlay District, which I'm sure you're aware of. In that plan, the comp plan, it talked about different districts, mixed use density district, in particular downtown. I love that term MUD. I don't believe it applies to the downtown. I believe it applies to an acronym. But there was also another component that this city adopted, mixed use corridors, which were to then determine where density would flow. It should flow into areas where there's good transportation corridors. Why is that important? Because now we're faced with overwhelming intensification of development pressures. And by 2010, that was beginning, and now it's really in full force, where the need to accommodate more and more densification is occurring sometimes not within those corridors, which the city adopted. Question, is Holmes Lane a transit corridor? I don't think so. I could be wrong. Somebody can clarify that for me sometime. Is High Street a mixed use, a transit corridor? Yes, it is. It's also an older neighborhood. And many of those homes down there could have attached dwelling units and other things added to them and meet the requirements of density. There's ways to solve this density thing without brand new development, is the point I guess I'm getting to. All right, so conversions and additional kind of housing elements can meet the density requirements that the city's now faced with, but they need to flow along the transit corridors. Are they doing that? You know, High Street is a transit corridor. That's where the buses go. They go up Lynn Avenue, right by Holmes Lane, and out to Warner Milne and such. Some questions I guess I'm posing here, talking to some people that I've known that I think are credible. Why are we not encouraging, where we can, accessory dwelling units and that kind of development to meet the density requirements along these transit corridors? It makes sense. Is Park Lake Village on a transit corridor? No, it really isn't. Beaver Creek Road, concept plan, yes, that's a transit corridor. South End Road, yes, that's a transit corridor. The real question I guess I'm trying to bring to the table here is Tom McCall's spirit was that everyone should participate and that we shouldn't simply give up to the idea that development would overwhelm us. The real question I guess I have, are we going to have Beaverton on the hill, or do we have it already? I've talked to a lot of former mayors about this, and people kind of wonder what's going on. Can we accommodate some of these needs in a different way, such as the spirit of Tom McCall? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We have Miss Sherry Williams. And please state your name and city of residence.
Won't be as complex. I wrote something out before you start that, but obviously talked and all they've talked has kind of changed, so I'm just going to do talking points at this point. Okay, so my name is Sherry Williams. I am an Oregon City resident. My concern, and also the concern of the people that live around me, is parking. I live in older Oregon City over by the Abernathy Center on a very strange little street. There's no sidewalk. We just got one sidewalk that goes up the street. The street that goes up to the hospital right by the Abernathy Center, old post office. I live on the tiny street that's there. We have one lot left that's there, and there's no parking. If there's a duplex or a triplex, there's no street parking, there's no hill parking. And I know a lot of these old districts are the same exact way. My house was built 100 years ago. I don't have a driveway. My garage can't fit a car. It's actually halfway owned by the city. But the thing is that I get that housing needs to be fixed and the homeless thing is horrible. But to think that only one car per unit is sufficient is not happening. 2 people live there, 2 cars. Most people have, their wife and their husband both have to work. So they're gonna have 2 cars. So if you have a duplex, you're gonna have 4. If you have a triplex, you're gonna have 6. And there's just not enough parking. So when you talked about using the parking, like the sidewalk, as part of your stipulation for the one, I think you know what I'm saying, please don't do that. It's not gonna work. It might work in new developments, and I get that because they can accommodate, but in our neighborhoods, in the older parts, it's not gonna work. It's just overcrowded as it is, especially with all the, new restaurants and all that going down. There's just not enough room. And there's no vacant lots that are turning into parking lots. I mean, it's ridiculous. Abernathy Center has a full-on venue part, and they still park on my street because there's not enough parking there. It's ridiculous. So I'm a small business owner. I'm trying to do my best in Oregon City. I've been here my whole life, but there's just gotta be some sort of middle ground, and that takes everybody's needs and problems into consideration. I don't have all the technical wording, but that's just basically as small people that think that things need to be fixed. And I get this bigger picture that the state is trying to do, but I think we need to reel it in and really think about Oregon City as Oregon City and not Portland. I'm gonna be done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Uh-oh, did I mix some? Be careful. Okay. Okay, we have Ms. Carla Laws. And please state your name and city of residence for the record. Thank you. You have 3 minutes. Do your best.
I will.
Thank you.
My name is Carla Laws. I live on Roosevelt Street in Oregon City. I also am a chair of a neighborhood association, and I will share examples of my experience, but I won't use my neighborhood association as what I'm saying. Anyways, I was thinking about all this, and we talk about equity. And, you know, I look at the price of what my house is worth. I live in historic Oregon City. My street was used as an example on the code changes in 2019. I have a 1-lane street, cars park on one side. They tried to remove the 2-hour restrictive parking that the neighbors fought for. What I'm concerned about is our street was used as an example, and it's not the ideal scenario for a lot of people. I mean, kids play on the street, and they're putting themselves at risk. You can't see as well with cars parked on one side. Some people think, oh, well, it automatically slows traffic down, but it really doesn't. My street would not be equipped for any more cars or having a duplex, even though we would be prime area to do it, you know, in terms of the city's definition. One thing that concerns me as a neighborhood association is, you know, when I'm working with them, is neighbors are kind of conflicted because we look at affordable housing. If you look at my house is a historic home. It's not registered historic. But my house is probably the value of a brand new townhome. And really, like, gosh, I got a lot more for the buck if I'm willing to work on it than a townhome. Because they have less parking, they can't do what I can do in a 2,300 square foot home. And so what I'm looking at is I'm scared also that, gosh, if a house eventually could be torn down that has history and torn down to build, you know, affordable housing that's really not affordable. They can't get much more affordable than a townhome what it is, and it's overpriced as it is right now. So I'm concerned about really equitability. Like, we're talking about making it affordable, but really is it? You know, like, we're restricting the middle class to be restricted to a townhome or a condominium in the future, and that's it. They're gonna have less options. They're gonna have less ability of buying power. Now, I'm totally for equitable housing and more housing if it's actually affordable. And with the economy the way it is and inflation, I don't know how that's possible. One thing that was brought up to mind in the PowerPoint presentations was, and I'm seeing right now as a neighborhood chair, not in my personal residential experience, historic overlay not being honored, flood hazard overlay not being honored, geological hazard overlay not being honored. Willamette Greenway overlay, I'm not experienced much with that. Natural resource overlay is not being honored in R2 zoning. And like, for instance, hey, there's a transportation safety report. It's old and outdated. Hey, they're doing the traffic safety report if they're doing a new one. And it's not accurate because they didn't poke the soil and do a geological stormwater study, and a geological study accurately beforehand. So I'm not seeing our city right now making great decisions on planning forward. So how can we count on building in our neighborhoods and duplexes and honoring actually having accurate traffic safety reports and accurate data, accurate soil poke, honoring our neighbors and coming together as a community. And, my driveway, I have a driveway right along my neighbor's driveway. If I became a duplex without their permission, which I totally could, I would be like the meanest neighbor to not even run it by them or take up parking. I have neighbors that take up 4 parking spots between the street and the driveway because they have cars. So we haven't totally conformed yet to having less cars. Now, I only own 1 car. My whole family does because we don't leave very much. We both work at home. But you can't expect everyone to do that. And, we're looking at also the toll coming in and being forced. And bottlenecks here. We're in a very unique position where we're a huge bottleneck that we can't avoid the toll. So, I mean, there's a lot to think about here. And if this was going to actually be implemented, I would rather have more studies that are more accurate, actual soil samples and stormwater studies done before traffic safety reports and an accurate, updated traffic safety report. And I also, you know, we're talking about stormwater. You know, we look at our water utility and a lot of normal residents think, gosh, the water is so expensive. It's really not water, it's stormwater. And the bottom line is the water's going downhill. And I head downhill from people above the hill, and people are below me. And as neighborhood chair, when I'm running the neighborhood chair, I have noticed that the biggest thing is we're not considering what we're doing to our neighbors down the hill. And stormwater, I'm sorry, we're not stepping up to get that cost down, and we're not stepping up on infrastructure. My terracotta sewage line is behind my house that they have to test all the time. It's terracotta, it's like deteriorating. And a lot of historic Oregon City is terracotta. So I really, really, really hope there's a lot to consider here before just, oh, let's just implement this. I would beg you to take time and really think this through. And I really appreciate you listening to me, and thank you very much. And I really appreciate all you volunteering, so thank you.
Thank you, Carla. All right. Last but not least, Mr. Jim Nacita. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. And you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Jim Nacita, Oregon City. First, I'd like to start with a belated thank you. I have not been before the Planning Commission in several years. I was trying to remember when the last time I was before this commission, and what came to mind was the implementation of the implementing code for the Beaver Creek concept plan, because I had for years been advocating, cottage manufacturing in the Beaver Creek concept plan, and I remember in my memory during those hearings, I remember Commissioner Stoll and Commissioner Gage being specifically supportive of that concept. So I'd like to thank them and thank everybody else who made that happen. It's nice to see that in the code now, although it's, I guess it's called the Thimble Creek concept plan, which is just an indication of how long it's been since I've been active in things. So anyway, regarding tonight's agenda, I'd like to speak to your hearts, if I may. I'd like to give you a scenario. Right now, my family is going through the experience of elder care. I'm sure many of you and many of the people you know and many of the people watching have gone through that experience. And the scenario I'd like to give you on that is this. Imagine a family that is going through the experience of elder care and its challenges. Imagine also a family that has a brother, a sibling, or a nephew, or a cousin who has a mental health problem and is living in a tent in the Newell Creek Canyon or along I-205 somewhere or under a bridge. And imagine also, hypothetically, that possibly if that family could roll a tiny house ADU into their backyard, that because of the specifics of that family, that could be to them a godsend. However, that family lives in the MUC district in Oregon City. So they can't do that. And that's not fair. And it's not fair for a couple of reasons. One is my submissions indicated historically they have been supposed to have been in this district for a very long time. A very long time, okay? Another part of the scenario, and another reason why it's not fair, not just or equitable, this family could be, have right across the street from them, or right across the alley, or right across the lot line, another district like middle density residential that does allow a similarly situated family to roll in that ADU to help their family members. This is a really, really unfair situation, and it needs to be solved now. These are right now needs. I'm giving you a hypothetical, but if you go across the swath of Oregon City, just statistically, I guarantee you it's pretty damn close to 100% probability that there is some family out there in that kind of situation that could be assisted, and that really arbitrary zoning is preventing from happening. So I ask you all not to wait for some future proceeding to finally solve these problems. They're really not difficult to solve. I've been accused in the past, and frankly, I don't think unjustly, of overthinking things. I concede that in the past, I have overthought things, okay? I believe, I hope you will agree, that the idea that adding the single word duplex into the MUC or MUD districts requires a whole other planning proceeding, kind of overthinking things, okay? You can solve some of these issues in this proceeding. Maybe there are some other issues that might need a second, but you can get a lot of bang for the buck in Oregon City on helping people by making some incremental additional additions beyond HB 2001 and some of these non-HB 2001 zones. And I really beg you all to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Normally we give the applicant a chance for rebuttal. Do you want to address any of these comments at this time?
Well, this is a legislative process, so
There's
there's
no
no rebuttal.
Okay, all right. Okay,
The staff an opportunity to comment, but it wouldn't be a rebuttal.
okay, all right. Would you like to comment?
Well, I think we're looking for direction from the Planning Commission. So what staff
All
has
right,
done is
well-
provided a compliant HB 2001 red line, and we have these additional policy questions, and I can provide the slide back up, if you want to put
Yeah,
the
that would be
PowerPoint back
good.
up. And I think I'll hand it back to the Planning Commission, but the next hour, it would be nice to leave the meeting this evening with kind of clear direction to staff on what policy issues you'd like to pursue or what areas you think the compliance option should remain.
Okay, and a quick question, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think it's unanimous, we're taking a break, 5 minutes.
All right, we're back live.
No, I know exactly when he was here. Oh, stormwater. Stormwater.
Okay, we are back from break. And at this point, I think we had some, I think staff was going to guide us a little bit. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Ms. Christina Robertson-Gardner.
Sure, and I'm going to hand it over to our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Victor, and we're going to kind of help, in the spirit of time, try to consolidate our conversation.
Thank you.
So, quickly, I wanted to point out that this is a legislative hearing review, so there is no right to a continuance. We've had some testimony of people requesting a continuance. There is no right to a continuance here. It is discretionary up to the commission if you want to continue and not make a final decision tonight, or if you'd like to make a final decision tonight. The public will have a full unencumbered opportunity to testify before the city commission. Whether you decide tonight, you decide April 11th, you decide whenever you decide, they will have a full opportunity to testify before the city commission. And right now we expect that commission date to be April 20th. That could move depending on how you all decide to proceed, but it won't be before the 20th. And folks can check on the city's website to find out exactly when it will be. But so I wanted to point that out. Second of all, the staff would like your feedback on the additional elements, but in the interest of time, rather than go one by one, I would suggest that you all sort of start with the compliance option, and then each of you say what other ones you are interested in pursuing, rather than sort of vote on each one so that we can just move along. So that's what I would suggest. And then we'll try to keep score so we can get sort of general consensus. And, you know, if the stars align and everybody's on the same page, make a decision tonight if you're ready, and there will be a recommendation with a red line that attaches. Or if you're not and you want to see red line language, we'll come back on the 11th to with revised language as you instruct.
Okay, so the only difference that would happen if we decided to make a decision tonight and make a recommendation would be that if more public comments came in before now and the middle of April, the comments would be going to city commission instead of back to us.
Correct.
But they'd still be seen and heard and be part of the process. All right.
I have one question.
Sure.
When would it be most appropriate to address Mr. Nacita's comments? I think they have a lot of validity, and I wouldn't want them to get lost in the shuffle.
Sure, I actually have them in this slide. I have the Planning Commission additional comments, which are on the last page of your tracker form. And I added one of them because that came in before, which was Mr. Nacita's comment about potentially allowing duplexes for existing single family. But then he's expanded on that, as well as Mr. Edgar's, so you can refer to the slide to add on to those extra policies.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm confused now on how we're going to go forward. I'm not excited about talking about them all at once. I think personally, I think we need to go one by one. I realize there's a deadline on this, but there isn't a deadline of tonight.
That is correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, just a recommendation, just a suggestion.
Okay.
But you all get to decide.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
I think the consensus is we go through them one at a time.
Yep.
All right, well, I will follow the slides
Okay.
to the section.
Would it be helpful if we could go through the, skip to the must choose options and then go through the rest of them? Does that be, or does it matter?
Well, if we maybe put a check next to them so we can keep track of which ones we addressed and which ones we didn't, because I can't remember where we were. Let's just go through them. Let's just go through them.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll follow along with my slides.
All right.
Sure, I was ready for Chair Schlangenhofer, but I'm happy to take it on. The first one is middle housing in the geohazard area. The compliance option is maintain the existing 2 units per acre limitation, which is in the code today.
Okay,
An alternative option, which we do not have red lines for, would be permit some middle housing, same footprint as single-family housing. So the 2 units per acre would be changed, but the disturbance area and all the requirements of geohazard would be the same for single-family.
okay, I guess I should have asked this question before we started this. Do we vote on each one, or?
I think we're looking at, is there a general consensus for the
Okay.
compliance option or not, or something more?
On geohazards, I think, you know, compliance at the most. I wouldn't try to pack anything else in there besides the minimums.
I agree. I'm not interested in putting more people potentially at risk. There's lots of other property that can be middle housing without messing with geohazard.
Yeah, I agree.
And I
Just
see
a
Commissioner
question.
Gage is nodding her head. I think she agrees.
Just a question. 2 units per acre of the lot or of the geohazard area, or how does that?
Well, it's 2 units per acre with a minimum of 1 unit. So if you have 5,000 square feet, you get 1 unit. If you have 20,000 square feet, you get 1 unit.
So if I have 40,000 square, if I have 1 acre and a third of the lot is in the geohazard, is that 2 units?
That's a math calculation that I can't answer today, but there is a math calculation matrix table that one would create to get that answer.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so it's a consensus, compliance? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, next one.
That's an easy one.
And do you want to know if we want to revisit it or not?
Correct. Would you like to
okay.
revisit this in the fall with further discussion?
Okay, anybody want to revisit it? No.
I think so.
See, we did one. Good job.
right.
That's great.
That one quick.
We've all done our homework.
Okay, the next one is townhome maximum density. As you recall, the Oregon Administrative Rules provides a range of townhouse density for their maximum density. There's a range if you can choose. What's in your code today is the minimum, the lowest density option for maximum density. And that is, I think, the 17, excuse me, but I think it's the 17.5 units per acre. And so that is what's in the code today. If you wanted to pursue allowing townhomes to have a little higher density, you could do that, but I would need staff direction.
Okay, does anybody want higher density?
I was going to say that with the higher density and give builders flexibility to build a different project, they don't have to do a higher density, but it gives them more flexibility. And, well, that's my 2 cents.
Well, these are townhomes, so it's going to be
They're
really high
be more
density
closer
anyway.
to the lot line.
Well, they would still meet the underlying, well, no, they would have their own setbacks, but it would be allowing a higher density, so you probably would have smaller townhomes.
Okay, I don't have a problem with either one, so.
Setback.
I like the alternative option the best.
Okay. 2 people like the alternative.
I'm concerned about it because a townhome project in an existing single-family district is going to be jarring to begin with. And to have more units, I'm just a little, I'm bothered by that because it's going to be, of all of the middle housing options, this is the one that's going to be most jarring in terms of the neighbors.
Now, townhomes aren't, what's the zoning for townhomes? Is that?
Townhomes are allowed as infill, so I think what,
Could you put townhomes in a R8, R6?
absolutely. And so I think what Mr. Mitchell is bringing up is that potential of, it is a bit jarring potentially to have, but you could, right now we put in the lowest density. If the planning commission wanted to pursue a little bit higher density or maybe look at other options where there could be higher densities than the 17.4, staff's not quite ready for those kind of complicated red lines this spring, and staff would recommend looking at that at a fall hearing.
I am in favor of the 17.5. The reason being that reading the survey results and hearing the testimony, the general gist is folks who have taken the time to respond want us to minimize the impact of House Bill 2001. A lot of the testimony was this is bad in general, which is, what it is, but we can't do that. So the least we could do is the least we can do.
Yeah, we got at least 2 people talk about
keep that density low.
And And the effect, the impacts on parking, especially when you've already got cars on the street, and now you're going to triple the amount without requiring a whole lot more parking.
Right.
So, okay.
Well, I could be convinced to change
Mr.
back to
What's Patty saying?
the compliance.
Patty, can you repeat that? We can't hear you. Patty, can you repeat that? We can't hear you very well.
I could be convinced to go back to the compliance option so that you guys have some good valid points there.
Okay, so she'd be okay with the compliance option then.
And likewise, I can go back to.
Mr. LaSalle?
I would go with the compliance option.
Okay, let's go
I
with
think the
compliance
larger
option.
question is there a majority of the planning commission that would want to revisit it in the fall? Or is this something you do not want to revisit? Or do you not know if you want to revisit it?
Well,
We don't know, yeah.
If we're going to say no, then I don't know why we would revisit it.
honestly, because I think there's a lot we're going to need to revisit in the fall, because we have created this code. It's so piecemeal. We really need to step back out and look at housing all across every zone, from commercial to the MUD zones, all the way up, and make sure that our housing policy makes sense in all of those zones. So I won't know until the fall, until I look at more public comment, consider the things that Mr. Nocita has said, and others, we need to look at the whole thing.
Well,
So,
yeah, you bring up a good
I guess I don't understand why we have to decide whether or not to review it in the fall. Now, we can decide.
We can't. I think it's more of, provide staff a work plan for the summer. Great. But it's not needed. But it's always helpful to know what staff needs to work on this summer to be prepared.
On something that involves density like that, I almost think we should get as much public input as possible.
Okay.
Because we're kind of making the decision for, everybody in the city.
What I'm hearing is a big question mark for potentially the fall.
It sounds like we should probably revisit it in the
Yeah,
fall.
so a minimum density compliance standard today,
Yeah.
relook more comprehensively in the fall. Okay,
Good, all right.
Perfect.
Got 2 done.
look at us going.
All right. Cruising along.
Okay, this is the attached, detached question. So we have the compliance option is the revised code, which allows attachment to be either common wall or breezeways. A detached option could be allow a detached unit for a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, or none. So one option would be compliance, would be keep with the current code or the red line and come back in the fall. Pursue the detached option this spring. The going back to the common wall option and not allowing the attached breezeway, I will need to reach back with the state to see if that's something that we can do and is still in compliance with HB 2001. So I'll want your direction on that as well, because I don't have the answer for you.
Well, I go back to my statement that I looked up the definition of a duplex and a triplex, and every definition I ever saw was common walls. Now, I don't know how the legislation arrived at redoing Webster's definitions, but apparently they have done so. But my opinion is that they should be attached. During my whole life, and I won't tell you how old I am, but during my whole life, you look for property and you look at a duplex and they're attached.
I started
Mitchell's
out.
next.
I started out with Commissioner LaSalle's opinion, but I changed my mind. Because I guess I'm just not going to get hung up about a duplex is attached. And the reason I would like to allow detached, one of the concerns is that existing older single-family homes get destroyed, knocked down to build a duplex or a triplex or whatever. It's easier and, to me, more attractive to build a detached duplex than to try to attach a second dwelling unit onto an existing older home. That ends up looking like socks on a rooster, in my opinion. So I've come down in favor, I think we should allow detached duplex, triplex, quadplex across the board, because there's the potential that it might save an existing residential home from being destroyed.
I agree.
I'm going to piggyback. I agree with Commissioner Mitchell there. But I'm going back to the surveys that were done in the public comment, and the right to own individual homes was really high on the surveys. And I think that, you know, that creates, an individual home is more desirable, so I'm going to go with the detached.
For all options.
Yes.
Are we able to split it up? Allow it for duplex?
Yeah, this is all above and beyond what.
So it'd be 3 houses on a lot, detached instead of yeah, I'm going to go for all.
My gut is with Commissioner LaSalle of redefining words, and that annoys me. You know, having a standalone building where you're not sharing a wall, assuming the lot's divided, would certainly be beneficial. I can't wrap my head around how we're still calling that a fourplex or a triplex or a duplex, but
Well,
it's just sort of a backdoor land
we come up
division.
with a better word.
Well, we can't because it's in the law, but I mean, it's a backdoor land division at that point, but whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody's got a different view of it, and I can see some merit in all of them. I think it was Carla Laws that said, how small do we want to get? And I mean, that is an issue, but if you're going to own something small, I mean, I think you should own the whole thing, all the walls, not just, you own 3, but then you got to share one of them, and then if the neighbor does something that smells, and then it's better to own the whole thing than sharing anything. So if you can separate them, even if you give them a 6-inch setback, at least it's your 6-inch setback. And I think it solves some problems and makes people feel a little better about the home they're living in. Probably easier to sell too. So I would support the detached because it's really not changing much of anything. The houses are still going to be the same size. Access is going to be the same, parking is going to be the same. I mean, those are all different problems, but I think moving them 6 inches apart isn't changing anything besides making them a little more attractive. So I agree with that. And then as far as revisiting it, do we need to revisit anything later? Okay.
Okay, so
how about that?
I'm not quite getting
So we
full
support
direction.
the detached.
I want to put down even minority opinions because I want to be able to pass that on to the city commission. So what I'm hearing is some, but not all of you are supporting all options, triplex, fourplex, duplexes as being detached.
Are we supporting
I'm good with detached.
Okay. Commissioner
on all
LaSalle?
of
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to have them attached.
How do we handle that?
We're really forwarding on to the city commission kind of your
Okay.
general direction, so I can note that this was not a.
It's not
There was a mix of opinion and
Okay.
and this is what it was. Okay, hold on a second, let me write this down.
All right. She agreed. It's like detached. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so there's going to be 2 that are really very much alike, which is, do you increase the lot coverage in the medium and low density zones? So this is the medium density slide, and then we have low density slide. So maybe we can have the same conversation for middle housing to allow a larger increase, to align kind of how we allow a larger increase for a main home and ADU. Or is this a compliance option this spring and have further discussions in the fall to see how that plays out? That could be something you pursue. So how do you see updating the lot coverage in our zones to address middle housing, either this spring or further discussion in the fall?
I'm inclined to go with the compliance option and revisit it.
For both low density and medium density?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if we're going to increase the density, we should have some public input on that. Maybe they all want it. I can't imagine they would.
Well, the thing is though, if we've allowed detached homes, there's very little difference in.
Well, in this situation, it would be, so the option, the alternative option is to kind of raise the middle housing lot coverage to be the same as a home and an ADU. So right now, if you had a detached duplex, which is usually, it would be larger than the, 600 square foot footprint ADU or 700, you would not have, you would have the underlying zones lot coverage. So that would be something to potentially look at to be more in line with the main home plus ADU. Or it could be something, once again, keep the compliance option this spring. It meets HB 2001, further discussed in the fall.
Okay, so there'd be a benefit to keeping the existing home and building an ADU compared to tearing it down and building a duplex where you'd have less allowed lot coverage.
True, but you might have a bigger unit for unit 2 because it's a duplex and you're not capped on the size.
That is true. So you can do the section first. Say that again.
Yeah, say that again.
This is an example of the weird alignment now.
Right.
800 square feet.
So we have a higher lot coverage if you have a house and an ADU. So now we're saying if you can build a middle housing in these two zones, should you have the lot coverage for a single family home, or should you align towards what we have now, which is we allow a little bit higher for a single family home and ADU?
Okay.
I agree, I like the alternative option myself.
But an ADU right now plus a house has a larger lot coverage.
We've got a question from Patty.
I'm leaning towards the alternative option again on this, but I would like to know what the public feels about this. That's just my opinion. Why not be able to have a little bit larger home on the property, which, if you can, if it's taking up the same space as a smaller home would, and leave that up to the discretion of the property owner. But I am curious as to what the public feels about this.
Okay.
So if we're interested in encouraging the preservation of existing housing and adding on to it.
But you can only go so many square feet on the ADU. So you
Right.
may never reach the 60, 65.
I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
So if our goal is to encourage that,
It seems like.
and then we increase that lot coverage, we're discouraging keeping the existing home because that's just the way the math works. So I think that if I have a single family home that covers, 50% of my lot and I want to add an ADU and that brings me up to 60, or I'm a developer and I can tear down the big house and just build a new duplex up to that 60 rather than being limited to the 40. So you're disincentivizing tearing down the old house and building a bigger one and building to that higher lot coverage.
Oh, yeah, so you're saying if you want to build a bigger second unit, you're incentivized to tear down the first one?
Correct.
Well, isn't that true if we don't increase the lot coverage also?
I don't think so. No,
Yeah,
so
it is.
you get more lot coverage if you add an ADU to the existing house rather than tearing down the existing house and building a duplex.
But you could add on to the existing house, then build an ADU.
Right.
Which would be really messy.
If we're interested in preserving the existing house, then
That's what I was going for. I'm not sure
the
which one
compliance option,
accomplishes that.
I think, my opinion is the compliance option encourages that.
At first glance, I thought the same thing, and maybe I should just go back to that.
I think this is a really good thought process, and we've had these same internal discussions, and I don't think there's a obvious directed answer. I think there's a lot of inputs. Be it attached or detached duplex may have a different input of an existing house. So I don't know on a staff level if I can definitively say if you do this, this will, support or not support something.
One
there's
other
a lot
question.
of inputs.
Since duplexes could possibly be detached, Can an existing home be part of a duplex and do it have to be the same size?
No, it could be, unit 1 could be the house and unit 2 could be the new detached unit.
So then what's the difference with that and an ADU?
ADU is limited on the size of the footprint.
So then someone just applies for a duplex permit?
And an ADU is on one lot, right?
Correct.
It's a second unit on
HB
one lot.
2001
It couldn't be split up.
specifically did not address, which is a
Okay,
bit
all right,
frustrating on my end by staff, but they did not address ADUs. ADUs at this time can't be land division. You would have to, I guess, graduate it into a duplex. It would have to meet the underlying zone setbacks. So you couldn't actually be that 600 square foot ADU in the back corner unless we allowed a future, allowance. So ADUs stay with the house unless they absolutely, for some reason, can manage to meet all the dimensional standards of a detached duplex. There may be one out there. And then I guess they pay the system development fee difference and be duplex.
Okay, I'm going to throw a wrinkle in here. Sure. And I'm going to be in favor of the compliance option and revisiting it in the fall, because I would like to see us find a way to allow increased lot coverage if the existing home is preserved.
Yes,
Some sort of a
yes,
lot
I like
coverage
that.
bonus. Where they get an extra 5% if they maintain the existing older home.
Could we add that?
And that's something that's going to take some,
That's going to take a little bit because there
Right.
have to be a time limit on how long that home stays and who monitors it. So that we'll have to think about what that code might look like.
okay, so that's why I'm suggesting compliance for now and revisit in the fall with the possibility of a lot coverage bonus for protecting the existing home.
Agree.
I like that, I agree as well.
I agree with that.
What did Patty say?
She agrees with that.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're good on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so that's both of the, now, where the last two are cottage cluster questions. We have the on-street parking and the garages. So the first one is on-street parking credits. Compliance option is maintain the requirement of one off-street parking space per unit, which is required by HB 2001. The alternative option would be to allow proposals to use any abutting on-street parking as part of their calculation.
Based on public comment, compliance option.
I agree.
Yeah. That's, I think we've received pretty clear direction on that.
Do we need to revisit it?
I agree.
No, it was pretty clear from.
Yeah, no need to
Yeah.
revisit
Now
that.
revisit.
Yeah.
Hey. Garage option for cottage clusters.
Did we skip lot coverage and low coverage?
Well, the
density zone?
conversation was lot coverage for both low density and medium density zones. We kind of
Oh, okay,
combined
okay.
Because it's
Okay.
the same conversation,
Great.
so I was
Yep.
seeing if we wanted.
Got it, thank you.
Okay. So cottage cluster, okay, garage options. The compliance option is to maintain our existing code, which allows a little two-car garage detached, or you could have an attached garage, but you got to include it as part of your footprint of your house. So if you really want the garage, you got to, have less living space and have more garage space. So the alternative option would be more permissive in allowing opportunities for attached garages.
Well, I think the public testimony, was this one where they, people wanted to have their own garage?
I think people talked about
Yeah, there
parking,
was
so this doesn't change the required parking, it just kind of says, is it up space? Could it be a garage? I mean, they're both, you start with your required parking, it's then does it look like?
Yeah.
I think it was Sherry Williams that said that nobody in her area has a garage or a garage that a car fits in. So if someone wants to build a garage instead of an ADU and improve the parking situation, I wouldn't argue with that.
Well, it's a shared garage or a,
Yeah, I mean, that's today. So today, and so I think the upsides and downsides is you have more opportunities for enclosed parking, but then you have more strictures, right? So it's that conversation about, infill, subdivision, what's the compatibility, how many structures? I don't have the answer for you, but that's kind of how I see it is it's really a balance of you have your cluster housing and your infill, and when are accessory structures or attached structures good, or when are they too much. That's a qualitative question and answer.
A shared garage, is that one open space or is it two, like?
That would be like a two-car.
Partition wall or?
Probably usually, it depends, but it would usually be like what you see is a two-car garage and then 2 parking spaces.
So like on a lot of older houses around, in the backyard, there's basically a 2-car garage with the property line down the middle, that kind of thing.
And you see that in apartment complexes too.
Yeah.
They'll have groups of detached garages, so the same kind of idea.
This is one that I'm the most vague on. I just can't see this one you have a cluster development with all those garages. I don't see how that's all the, individual. I guess maybe leave the compliance and look at it in fall. I don't know, whatever.
I think there is a compliance for this one. This is right?
Compliance is just keep existing code.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm in favor of the alternate one being more generous, and part of this is my own interest. I think cottage clusters done right are underused in our city. There are some just absolutely tremendous cottage clusters developments in Washington State. Very attractive to me personally, as an aging in place solution. And so I'm in favor of providing the most flexible option for garages in order to make cottage clusters more attractive to build and sell. They're just done right. They're wonderful. And, but I would also like to say that in the fall, I hope we can look at our whole code related to cottage clusters, because I have quite a few questions with what I saw in the highlight and the strike throughs that were in the red line version you sent out, where some of the size restrictions and such came from. But on this particular issue of garages, I'd be in favor of the alternative option, just to make these as attractive for developers and purchasers.
Well, I could go that way too.
Same here.
I agree. Okay, well, that was easy enough. Let's go with the alternate option.
Okay, so either to the city commission or in a packet, there'll be red lines with the revised option.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay. So now we are to our future policy questions.
Okay.
And I have all of them that so far I've gathered on this slide, and then some of them are on your packet below, but generally a staff recommendation is being able to thoroughly and holistically look at code changes. I generally recommend for the fall, but I will take your direction if any of these are something you think is absolutely needed for the spring. So we can start with the Planning Commission directed ones that were in your memo that was attached, and those are the top ones. We can go through those 4 or 5, and then we can talk about the public comment ones that have come in, and it really is more of, this is not binding you to anything. This is more of just a general work plan and general direction to the City Commission of which items on this list would you like to have additional discussions about in the fall? And then are there other items you want to bring for me to forward to the City Commission that are items you want to also address as it relates to middle housing?
The only thing I really have a strong opinion about is the mixed-use corridor and allowing duplexes. I'm in favor of that. And I was looking at the zoning map during the break. So mixed-use corridor is essentially 7th Malala, Beaver Creek, and a little bit of Warner Milne. Am I missing?
Yeah, and a little bit of High. It kind of pops in a little bit of High Street, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see a reason to allow existing single-family and triplex and fourplex and not allow duplex. That just seems like a hole we could fill easily.
Right, I agree.
Oh, I think Commissioner Gage is trying to speak.
Is that,
I was saying,
do we have to wait for the
I
fall for that? Isn't it adding the word duplex to the permitted uses?
You do not have to wait for the fall. I just, in general, not on a staff level, we're not in a place to bring on multiple new policy questions with multiple complicated impacts. It is up to your discretion, and you're passing this on to the city commission.
How much work would it add to put that in the package?
It would not be that hard.
Okay.
I'd like to see it in the package now.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we all agree.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it sounds fair.
So just an MUC 1 and 2, not MUD? Or both, or revisit MUD in the fall?
Maybe we could revisit that. I don't know how many houses would fall into MUD. Are
There's
any?
some, but, I mean, in general, I think the conversation, how we got to where we are was this conversation of trying to look at not underdeveloping our commercial districts, but a lot of these questions of duplexes are existing small lots where you're never going to put a 5-unit multi-story project on it. So, but it's hard to, line item a use code to say, oh, you can do this, but only in these lots, and, then it gets really complicated. So that is the question. I mean, mixed use downtown also does not allow duplexes, though they do allow live work, and they do allow some opportunities of 1 unit or 2 units as it relates to commercial.
Okay.
For new uses.
And then it was one other acronym, NC. What is that?
That's a neighborhood commercial, and that is in the the 3 concept plans. The little neighborhood nodes that are in Thimble Creek, Park Place, and South End have a neighborhood commercial zone. We don't have any here that's currently zoned, but it's looking at a small commercial node, and on a staff level, I would not recommend duplexes because they are very small nodes. And that's a very specific chance to get commercial. And duplexes is definitely an underdevelopment of an existing proposed little commercial node in a district. So I would not recommend that. Whereas I think what you're saying about the mixed use corridors, we're kind of working with these existing small lots within a general commercial corridor.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Okay.
I'd be supportive of the mixed-use commercial, skip the mixed-use downtown for now, and skip the nodes in the Beaver, or the new concept plans.
Okay. Yeah, I'd support that.
I agree.
Do you want to revisit either of those zones in the fall?
Should we revisit?
Yeah, I think we should revisit MUD down in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we can look a little more into exactly what that means. All right.
Anything else on this that you want to look at in the fall? Either, and I'll open it up, either in the first column or the second column.
What is high-density zone development standard?
This is this weird thing. It kind of actually is another iteration we talked about in the low-density, medium-density lot coverage. Is now we're having a situation where our high-density residential's density is really darn close of units per acre to our medium-density residential. So the question is, now that medium-density residential has more uses and different densities, should the R2 high-density district have some of their minimum densities pushed up to further differentiate between the 2 zones? And I don't have an answer for you. It's more of, this is now something that's a little unaligned because of HB 2001.
It was the ability to have multifamily, wasn't it? So
It is, but the multifamily units per acre minimum is 1 unit every 2,000 square feet, which is pretty darn close to the R 3.5 zone and R5 zone. And what that means is if row houses are the predominant kind of market option that we're seeing, and we want to ensure that we have lots of different housing options, if the R2 zone doesn't really provide any additional density than is allowed in the R 3.5 zone, it may default to row houses. So you may see more row houses being built in the R2 zone because you're not really additional density options to build multifamily. If I have the same kind of units per acre, I'll probably default to the easier option, which is to build row houses. So if the city wants to see a more diverse option, one thing we did hear from kind of our affordable housing developers is a want for ground floor or 1 floor living, which you generally don't get in townhomes, you generally get that in more of a multifamily approach, either through the ground floor or with the elevators. So that is something to think about, is how this density may impact a city's want for to keeping all of our housing options as like a marketable option. And I don't have the answer for you today about what the right number should be, but that is something that was flagged.
I also thought that affordability consultant was talking about the areas we had the biggest shortage in was in the multifamily and the high density.
Correct.
So I would like to revisit this in fall.
Correct. That's what our housing needs analysis did say. That's where we have a deficit.
Yeah, and if it becomes more marketable to have townhouses instead of what we really need, we might want to look at this. Or what the market needs.
Sure.
Personally, I think everything on that list is worth a look in the fall. There's a couple of them up there that are hot buttons of mine. And I'll throw one out there, lot averaging. I don't think we should allow lot averaging. I think we should require lot averaging, especially with missing middle housing now. If you're going to come in with a 100-unit subdivision, let's require that 25% of them be middle housing, and 25% of them, whatever, be on undersized lots, and an equal number on oversized lots. Let's build something that looks like the old neighborhoods in our town, where there's different lot sizes and different sizes of houses, instead of R6 cookie cutter, 6,000 square foot, 2,300 square foot home subdivisions that I'm tired of looking at. That's my soapbox, and I'm off of it now.
Patty, say something.
Can I bring in, under public comment, the tiny homes? We didn't really touch on that, I don't think, and if there is a way to include that somehow, I think it would be very important.
Tiny homes, yeah.
The comments that Mr. Nacita made, I think are very valid, and maybe if it's something that people are not real fond of, maybe there's a certain hardship permit or something that would allow somebody to have it. Just like on country property, you can get a hardship permit for a loved one to live on the property if they have medical issues or whatever issues. So just something to think about.
Yeah.
So tiny homes refers to something less than 200 square feet, and does it have anything to do with the foundation?
Tiny homes are very complicated. They have a lot of issues that relate to them. Hardship criteria is one of them. Being an RV, being a vehicle, being not a vehicle, SDCs, hooking up to utilities, not hooking up to utilities, time period. So bringing tiny homes into the conversation, I think, is really great. But there's a lot to discuss as we move forward and what the actual code language might be in the policies implications. And so if you move forward for wanting to see this, please let staff know and we can start looking through that. But I don't have easy code to give you, and I don't think that the public has been noticed kind of for the things related to tiny homes that really do require kind of more outreach and communication. But there are a lot of issues that both Planning Commission and City Commission will want to think about as we move forward, but it is absolutely a housing option that this community could pursue, but it's not necessarily required as part of HB 2001.
I have a question. I believe Mr. Nacita has something he would like to mention, but the public testimony portion is over, so how do we address that?
You can take testimony. It's a legislative matter, so it's fine. I mean, if you'd like, or you can ask Mr. Nacita to come back before the City Commission, whichever you prefer.
Okay. Would we like to hear from Mr. Nacita?
Let him speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks in particular to Commissioner Gage. Just to clarify, my written comments to you kind of focused on the duplex question. My testimony tonight was really about rolling an ADU to a single-family grandfathered residence in the MUC district. So that's different from duplex. And I thank you all for adding duplexes, but just to get to Commissioner Gage's, what I think she's getting at. I'm not sure I'm really clear on the difference between an ADU and a tiny house. Now, an accessory dwelling unit is already in, was it chapter 1720 on the various types of housing? So ADUs are already authorized in Oregon City in most zones. They're not authorized in MUC, just like duplexes are not authorized in MUC. MUC is really constrained. I don't know how it got that way, but it's weird. So in my written comments, I was focusing on duplexes. Tonight, I had mentioned ADUs in my written, but I was really kind of focusing on how, being able to roll in an ADU into a backyard in MUC when other districts can do it already. It's just a basic matter of fairness that people in a grandfathered single-family home in MUC also have that benefit to their families of being able to roll in to the back of a backyard in that zone. That's just the clarification I want to make. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good clarification, I think, conflating the tiny home conversation, but ADUs do hook up to city sewer and water, do pay a system development fee. So rolling in an ADU is rolling in a new residential unit. So I just want to verify that. So if ADUs are allowed in the district, we would review anything that's brought in as a new dwelling unit. So the ADU is hooked up to city water and sewer, and you pay your systems development fees for an ADU.
Okay, so since in an MUC, if someone wanted to add a second dwelling unit or income or for whatever reason, they'd be more likely to preserve the existing house if we allow an ADU over saying it has to be a duplex where it's possible, more possible that someone would tear the existing house down. So how hard would it be to say we could allow ADUs and duplexes? Is that a big problem?
Sure. Some of this gets to the conversation of like what is and what is not. Some of it relates to system development fees and what category you're in, and I can look up the differentiation between a accessory dwelling unit, system development fees, and a one unit and a duplex. The duplex is slightly more, it's not dramatically different, but the one unit and a duplex is slightly more than an accessory dwelling unit. But at some point, they're both a new dwelling unit that hooks up to city water and sewer and pays system development fees.
Okay, so do we want to recommend both?
So this ADU can be a mobile unit.
If you hook up to city water and sewer, it no longer, like a manufactured home, it is, the wheels are taken off, you hook up to city water, sewer. And
Oh, okay, the wheels are taken.
Yeah, just like a manufactured home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, so I was thinking tiny home.
Yeah,
So
so
no.
that's why like tiny homes are kind of or the hardship allowance for RVs in the county, that's kind of like another, like a new category that we'd have to create and treat it differently than a new dwelling unit that's hooked up to city water sewer that pays system development fees.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to dive into tiny homes right now, since it is so much different. But the ADU is close enough. It pays SDCs, gets connected to sewer and stormwater, so.
Yeah, ADU and duplex in the MUC.
Okay, so what I'm saying is both adding ADU as a permitted use and adding duplex, yep.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And
The tiny home still should be a full conversation.
yeah. And then the land use affordability incentives, I do like that would be discussed later too, because it should benefit more than the person developing the property. There's no point in doing any of this if they just sell 3 at market value and they're no cheaper. So it doesn't help affordability if they're still expensive.
Can you just give me a quick example of a land use affordability?
Sure. Like higher lot coverage.
Oh, okay.
Setbacks, things that aren't financial, like what are higher density, I don't know, like things that you can do and I don't have it memorized.
With some sort of commitment that it would remain
Yeah,
affordable.
so you have a definition of what is affordable housing. It meets the requirement, you fill it out, you show that you have it. You know, we have a criteria, we show that it stays affordable for X years, and then you can get these additional development options.
Okay, thank you.
And that could also be in the high-density residential as well, if you're looking at this in the fall.
Are we heading toward a continuance?
I think so. Oh, well,
I think we've answered
I think because we.
everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. and
Don't
the
we need to
public-
see what comes?
You don't need to, so I have everything I need to forward this on to the city commission.
And the public still has an opportunity
The public still has
to,
an opportunity. In the city commission version, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
very two easy changes you will see. In the MUC 1 and 2 zones, you will now see a new red line that says duplex and accessory dwelling unit. That'll be the only change that goes into the city commission red lines. Plus, I'll write up a policy memo that kind of outlines this conversation.
okay?
And would that still be April 20th for the city
We'd still
commission?
be
or would
April
it-
20th,
okay.
just because we have a very full commission agenda, and it's hard to get on the agenda.
Did we get to the parking questions?
You did. So I heard compliance option for
Yes.
cottage housing, no revisit in the fall. And then I heard for the parking, that's something you want. Sorry, that's the one thing I wrote my notes on.
I think we did garage.
We did that.
We did the garage, we did a
What did you
cottage
say,
cluster
garage?
The
park.
alternative option.
You want to look at the alternative option, but I can't remember, sorry, that's one thing I did not write down. Do you want the alternative option in the red lines to the city commission, or do you want to revisit it in the fall and stay with the compliance option?
I think in the red line.
And so what I have is that on the cottage cluster on-street parking credits, that's the compliance option. And on the garage options for cottage clusters, that's the alternate option.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's what I was
Yeah, so that's three things. So then you'll see the alternate option in the red lines of the city commission package for the
Correct.
parking. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, not to, won't we also see the, under duplex, triplex, and
You're
quadplex
right.
configuration?
That's correct.
We'll
I'm
see
sorry.
that one
You're
as
right.
well. Okay.
So what I will also see allowing detached of all the middle housing options.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
They're taking all the notes. I'm taking the notes. I'm not thinking and talking well at the same time. So thank you all.
I've got one more thing. I'm trying to,
Okay.
my scrambled notes. I still have a concern about subdivision that's single-family homes today becoming quadplexes down the road. And I'm a little bothered by, or concerned about reasonable, I forget the exact word.
reasonable worst case.
You said reasonable worst case.
All right, let me go to my little slide. Okay. So
Yeah.
I am not a transportation engineer, so I'm going to give my best planaries of this answer. When you do a transportation impact analysis, you're looking at a certain number of trips, and they look at your lot size and the units, and the ITE manual tells you your PMP tricks, and you figure it out, and then you put it into the model and figure out if there are any off-site impacts by that number of PMP trips based on your tables. So if in a land use division, reasonable worst case scenario would be, can you build fourplexes on every single one of your lots? Does that off-site impact any of our transportation operational standards? If it does, we potentially could put a condition on your condition of approval that limits the amount of middle housing you could build if you did not do additional off-site impacts. That makes sense. What the transportation impact analysis guidelines would change would just be absolutely spelling it out. So when developer comes in, they just know exactly what they turn into to their transportation engineer, and the engineer for the applicant knows what they turn into our engineer. So everyone is working with the same beginning information, and there's not this back and forth dialogue.
So we could, as a city, say that you have to do the TIA based on quadplexes.
Correct, yep. And we say, okay, your 3-unit triplex, your 3-unit partition, 3 new units,
No,
yeah.
I'm not talking about one lot.
Yeah,
things.
okay.
I'm
Yes,
talking
your
about
100-lot subdivision, we could analyze it for fourplexes on every lot and see if that affects the transportation network and put conditions of approval that potentially reduce the amount of middle housing you can put on that subdivision.
So if it turned out that you just broke an intersection down the street,
We would figure out what the number of
we could, in the
units would be.
conditions, say you can only build X number of dwelling units on this. Okay. All right.
And that wouldn't be a violation of House Bill 2001 by limiting some of the
No,
properties?
because we would give a condition that says you shall limit and/or you make this change proportional to your impact. So you always write a condition that says,
Okay,
do nothing, you get this many units.
okay.
You know, no, do
If they put
nothing
in an
above.
overpass, they can get more.
You fix the intersection down the way because
Okay.
you impacted it, have those units, just like we do for other development.
Right, because we can't let people build whatever they want, and there's no way to access it, there's no way to get enough people in and out of it. Okay.
We would treat it just like every other subdivision where we analyze the number of trips based on the worst-case scenario.
Okay. All right, that makes me feel better. Okay, so with that said, do you have, I'm sorry, Commissioner LaSalle.
In looking at the staff report, which was several hundred pages, there's an awful lot of code changes that are proposed. And I thought we were going to be going through some of those code changes. And if we are, do we still have an opportunity to do so? For example, on page 64, code number 16.24.00.
Hold on, I'm going to bring it up.
It refers to mailed notice, and it refers to a requirement of the mail notice to any place located within 100 feet.
That's the
Now-
expedited land division requirements.
Pardon me?
That's part of the expedited land division requirements that come out of state statute. So that's the new,
But could we change that?
no, we can't.
So,
We're just putting in code what exists today. We actually, if someone came in with an expedited land division, we don't have it in code today, which is something we need to do. And then now we have middle housing, which has been told that needs to meet expedited land division process, which has the 100 feet requirement.
so all those changes to those codes are all required from, there's some pretty drastic stuff in there.
In that one section, in that expedited land use.
Yeah.
Well, there's also a whole bunch of others in here that, I mean, I've got probably 10 or 12 of them here that I have made notes on. Let's see.
Our hands are tied with most of it, and we made the decisions we were allowed to, I think.
Pretty much. Yeah, the ones we have discretion on, and we've made decisions, and the rest of them are state mandated.
Have you got another example
Well,
you're concerned about?
well, they've eliminated a lot of conditions. For example, I don't have the conditions written down here, but 17.16.030 eliminates items C and D, whatever those are.
Do you have a page number, Bob, on that? At the bottom, there's like a PDF page in the bottom middle.
17.16.030. They're eliminating items C and D.
Do you have a page number, Bob, at the very bottom? There's like a PDF page at the very bottom of the,
Yeah, okay.
I'm just kind of scrolling through. Do you see it? I need to get, you said 17,
17.16.030. That would be on page 92 of that
there we go, thank you.
draft report.
Okay. And sorry, can you quote that section again, 17 point?
17.16.030.
Okay, I'm scrolling down, oh. 17.16, sorry. So this is, hold on a second. So this is the cluster housing, 116.
It's on page 92 of the PDF.
Yeah, I know, it's not on my page 92.
6030 what? What?
Just 17.16.030. Why eliminate items C and D?
I'll have an answer for you as soon as I find it. Sorry.
Christina, I've got it up on the screen behind you.
Okay. So this is exactly the thing that I discussed, that talked about when you had middle housing, had a different design standard that we do not have for single family. And so what we had to do is we had to direct middle housing to use the same design standards as single family. And so when middle housing added something more, so open space, transition area, any of these that are different, we had to have the same as single family. So the answer for the compliance option today is we combine them and we just basically refer middle housing to the single family design standard. If the city commission or the planning commission in the future wants to add additional requirements for single family residential, they can then apply them to middle housing.
Well, I'm kind of uncomfortable with some of this stuff personally. Going back to further back on that same document, in policy 6.1.1, it states promote land use patterns that reduce the need for distance travel. But this was on goal 6, promote the conservation, protection, and improvement of the quality of the air in Oregon City. Now, what that further goes on to address is strictly travel. And it does not, possibility of increased vehicular traffic. It doesn't address the greenhouse effect of heating systems for all these new dwellings, which would be refer to the quality of air.
Is this for existing policies in 17,
well,
16? I'm just looking for what code section you're on, Bob. Sorry, I'm trying to follow it.
That's okay. At goal 6.1.
Cool. Oh, okay, right. I understand the staff report. No, I think you bring up a really interesting issue. I think what we're trying to look at in our compliance is we have to meet these codes. And we are showing compliance with a comprehensive plan, but at the end of the day, it still has to be met. So we're looking at how the HB 2001 code can meet our comprehensive plan, but if you feel that something is not, that you don't feel, let's say there's a code section that's required by HB 2001 that you don't feel meets our comprehensive plan, that can be a conversation with the city commission yourself. That doesn't mean that we don't have to adopt it though.
Well, in interest of time, I'll leave it at that, but I'll probably follow up with some of these with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to just add something for Commissioner LaSalle's concerns. Could he bring some of these concerns to City Commission when they're working?
As an individual planning commissioner?
Just as a public comment
As an
in any way?
individual, he can certainly do that. He can't speak on behalf of the planning commission without authorization from a majority of you to do so.
Okay. Then I like giving people options. But as far as what you need from us tonight is, we've already discussed it, and then you need a motion to, or a recommendation? What exactly do we need to give you?
If the planning commission wishes this evening to make your formal recommendation, I would recommend that you recommend approval of GLUA, and I'll put it up there, I never remembered either. GLA 22-000 02 legislative 22-0002 with the recommendations as discussed with staff to be implemented into the red lines to the city commission, along with the additional policy question, deliberation, and discussion for the fall. As a general option, is that enough?
I think Aquila's got more.
Really long.
She has a long, well, let Aquila provide detail. I was going to provide a general overview, but.
Almost there, just give me one more.
Oh, well, she will provide you a fantastic motion, so I will let her
Okay.
finish that.
Got 3 minutes.
Yep. Is the clock
We
on?
have 3 minutes.
At 3 minutes.
Okay. All right, I think I've got it. All right, so the Planning Commission is making a, the motion is motion to recommend approval of the proposed code amendments in Exhibit A that comply with House Bill 2001, and recommend approval of these policies. It probably should be of the following policy options: detached middle housing, garage options for cottage clusters to allow up to 200 to 400, I think that was square feet, and add duplex and ADUs to MUC 1 and 2. Is that
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
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 Okay. We may have a second and a third. I'm not sure who got it first.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. So, motion by Commissioner Stoll and then a second by Commissioner Gage and Commissioner West. Can we get a vote?
Commissioner LaSalle? Aye. Commissioner Staggs is absent. Commissioner Mitchell?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Gage?
Aye.
And Commissioner Stoll?
Aye.
And Chair Dirk Slagenhofer.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay.
So this will go in front of the city commission at April 20th, or unless otherwise noted on our city commission website.
Okay. And do we have any communications?
Not from me, not from staff.
Okay, we're adjourned.